Hello citizens, this is Councillor Gian-Carlo Carra. This is another Ward 9 TV Light, and what we're talking about today is of particular interest to residents of Inglewood and Ramsey. 8th Street and the pending closure of 8th Street, that historic connector between Inglewood and Ramsey right on the west end of the communities, right before the 9th Avenue Bridge and the McDonald Bridge on the Ramsey side that connects Inglewood and Ramsey with a level crossing, hit the news in a very awkward way, and then we had a hard time sort of clarifying a lot of the points. I've had a lot of conversations with the media in the days since then. I've discussed this a lot on social media, and I've had a lot of one-on-one conversations with citizens. The point of this video is to basically compile everything and to be as clear as possible about where we're at, how we came to this point, and where we need to go. So to start, the basic situation between the CP Rail and the City of Calgary is that neither body has particular jurisdiction over the other. Municipalities control a lot of things within their boundaries. The CP Rail, when it was established, it was recognized that moving freight at the continental scale couldn't get bogged down in local politics, and so they were given broad powers, both historically and successively over the years, to establish their right to do their business without undue influence or entanglements at the local level. And so when we deal with the CP Rail, we deal with them the way foreign countries engage in diplomatic relations. We don't have control over them, they don't have control over us. The question then becomes, why on earth are we closing 8th Street because they want it closed? And that comes down to a fact, an unfortunate fact of contractual law. Sometime long ago in the early 1900s, an agreement was signed between the City of Calgary and the CP Rail that stated that at whatever point in time that the traffic became so intense on that that level crossing, that the City of Calgary would shut it down and would pay for whatever remediation was required. If the City of Calgary deemed that they needed a connector, they'd have to pay for that connector above or below grade. I fully expected that was something that was going to come into play as we negotiated the Green Line. And it was pretty clear to us that the CP Rail, now I think as an aside, it makes a lot of sense for the CP Rail to get rid of level crossings, and it makes a lot of sense for the city to get rid of level crossings as long as we're not destroying our network connectivity. And I'm a huge fan of network connectivity, but I'm also a fan of minimizing interface between heavy rail traffic and city traffic, because every time the crossing lights go down, or the crossing arms go down during rush hour, and people get stuck waiting for a train, we hear a lot about it from citizens, and they ask the question, why is the CP Rail allowed to do this? And I refer to my earlier points. They have the right to move freight regardless of what we're doing. So from our perspective, we want to be able to minimize that impact. From their perspective, and from I think both of our perspectives, every time there is a car or human on train violence, the trains win, but it's a pain in the, it's not just destructive for property, it's also a big pain for them. And so they want, from a safety perspective, we want from a safety perspective to be able to minimize level crossings. And from our perspective, we want to be able to keep our network connectivity up, especially in areas of the city that are densifying. So the other thing you should know about 8th Street is that it's not just an ancient agreement that 8th Street would close. It has been on the books as a possibility, and there was a conversation a couple of years ago with the Ramsey community, and they were very supportive of the plan to basically turn 8th Street into a cul-de-sac on both sides. The reason why the Ramsey Community Association at that time wanted that is because they were not particularly enamored of their neighbors, the Stampede. They were not enamored of the cut-through traffic that occurred after games and after major events. And they desired a more suburban, sort of protected experience for Ramsey. I, boldly sort of challenged that regime of community association leadership, arguing for the fact that we needed to better connect these neighborhoods, we needed to have interconnectivity. And in the mile between 12th Street, which is the current grade separated crossing of the tracks where the Green Line is actually going to go, and the at the time recently opened 4th Street underpass by the National Music Center. That's a mile of space, and the idea of becoming denser and more vibrant and more walkable and more intense inner city neighborhoods with a mile of space between north-south connectivity doesn't make sense from an urban design perspective. So that was one of the major points of contention I had with the previous leadership at the Ramsey Community Association. I felt, honestly, that I was sort of like a voice in the wilderness, arguing for network connectivity because it seems sort of obscure. And going into the Green Line, as we were starting to prepare to do the Green Line engagement and starting to scope the project, and as the money was coming in, we started to have conversations about the fact that CP Rail was indicating pretty strongly that 8th Street closing would be part of the deal, and we learned at that time that they had this ancient agreement, and so we started to talk about it. And my initial advocacy was for the idea that we could maybe not have a full, 2-code 4 or 4.5 meter clearance underpass at 8th Street, but we could tuck under it and it would work for small cars or cars, not big buses and not big trucks, but it could work for cars and people and bikes. And I had staff look at that, and they were partially reluctant to spend all the money on an interchange that wasn't fully separated, but they also looked at the grades, and from the 9th Avenue elevation to the top of the hill right before McDonald Avenue and having to get underneath the tracks, there was just no way to make it work. And the only way to get an underpass that actually worked was to go under 9th Avenue as well and pop up in 8th Avenue right by the Traverse. And that brings all kinds of traffic into a part of the neighborhood where we definitely don't want traffic, and that didn't work. And so we started looking at alternatives. And the 2 alternatives that were daylighted as technically feasible, not necessarily financially feasible, are 9th Street. So McDonald Avenue would sort of curve down to 9th Street. It would start to drop as soon as it crossed 8th Street, and you would lose a couple houses there, and it would get down low and then pop up right by Cinquecento's patio, where 9th Street and 9th Avenue meet. That was technically feasible. The other one that's technically feasible is not in Inglewood Ramsey at all. It's just 2 blocks east of the current 4th Street underpass and the Beltline, and it's the 6th Street underpass. And that would look a lot like the 4th Street underpass, and the idea is that that street that runs along the west side of Fort Calgary would just go underneath the tracks and pop up, in Victoria Park there. That would give you another link of network connectivity, but not necessarily connect Inglewood and Ramsey in the meaningful way that 8th Street currently does, and not necessarily improve that relationship. So my expectation is that we would have this discussion in conjunction with the Green Line charrettes that Inglewood and Ramsey held as we started to talk about this. But I think it turned out that there was some changeover in staff at CP Rail, and the new group of people that we were talking to seemed very, very sort of agnostic about needing to close 8th Street, and they seemed very clear with the idea that, we'll have to close it at some point in the future, but, let's not worry about it now. Green Line team was extremely excited to not have to worry about it now, because their project's costing a lot of money, and any place where they don't have to spend money, they were happy not to. I think their philosophy was, if we're not breaking it, we're not fixing it. And while I argued with staff at the time that we should really sort of just daylight this conversation because we want to build plans that will stand the long test of time, it was pretty clear that CP Rail wasn't interested, and so it just sort of fell by the wayside. We've done a lot of planning, we've put a lot of things in place. The Green Line has advanced very far in its planning, and late in the day, I'd say at the 11th hour, CP Rail sent their negotiation over to their risk management team, and their risk management team said, no way, we want this closed. And when they learned that they had a contractual agreement that allowed them to just absolutely request the closure, they took a hard line with us. And after trying to sort of negotiate and wheedle around the issue, it finally became clear that 8th Street was going to close sooner rather than later. And when you consider, the Green Line's going there, CP Rail builds trains differently now, and they want to be able to go back and forth across that intersection without getting complaints and without, you know, the dangers associated with that. And when you consider that Via Rail is talking about intercity rail on a dedicated track within the CP Rail right-of-way, and when you consider that's also the right-of-way for a potential future bullet train between Calgary and Edmonton, there's too much going on there for an at-grade crossing. So it really comes down to the fact that we now have clarity about when this intersection is going to close, and it's going to close in conjunction with the building of the Green Line. Like, we're going to have to close 8th Street to build the Green Line, and rather than it opening back up, it will remain closed. And so as part of that construction, we need to be very clear about the fact that we want and need an alternative to 8th Street. Some people have talked about 7A Street, which is the non-conforming, very low crossing on the other side of the Elbow River. That is on the books to become an extension of the Riverwalk. So everything that we love about the Fort Calgary Riverwalk, everything we love about the East Village Riverwalk is going to continue along the Stampede side of the river all the way to the Talisman Center in Lindsay Park. And it's going to be a lot like the Riverwalk we have today, although I think a little bit more wooded and a little bit more wild. And it's Riverwalk Phase 2 is funded, and the CMLC has been sort of like trying to get that project going, but until we understood what was happening with 8th and stuff, they really wanted to work that out. So the plan was to make it only pedestrian and bike, and to lock it off 7A Street from cars. There is a debate that's going on right now about maybe it is only for pedestrians and bikes, but during certain times of the day, certain days of the week, certain times of the year when there are major events at the Stampede grounds, maybe the bollards lower and cars can very quietly stream out of there to help alleviate the congestion problems. That may or may not happen. That really has nothing to do with the large-scale connectivity issues we're talking about. The happiest thing that I have that I think has come out of this whole issue is that I feared that I was a voice in the wilderness about the need to have this network connectivity. People have spoken, social media is unequivocal that, you know, 8th Street's important, and if we lose it, we need an alternative. So what we're going to be doing right now and moving forward is engaging the communities, and I know you guys have been engaged to death, and that's, you know, we're getting things right in Inglewood and Ramsey. It's really exciting, all of the changes, and we have to make sure we get them right, and this is just one more factor that we're going to have to consider. And the big question that's before us is, A, do we need network connectivity? My position is yes, let's stay on message with that. 2, which one is better, 6th Street or 9th Street? And, you know, finances are going to be part of the equation, and they're going to be part of the decision-making framework. And then it's going to be a balancing act between convenience and disruption. So over the next, you know, several months, and as we sort of lock in Green Line plans, we're going to be engaging on this question as well. That's everything I can tell you up until this point in time. Don't hesitate to contact our office for clarification, and please get involved. Thank you so much, citizens. Gian-Carlo Carra signing off.